Welcome to our deep dive into cGMP, current good manufacturing practices. It might sound a little, I don't know, technical at first glance, but this stuff really does have a big impact on everyone's lives, especially now with all this new stuff coming out like cannabinoids and psychedelics. We've got a really fascinating mix of sources here, some FDA guidelines, research papers, even a podcast discussing the history of all this. So today, let's try to break down what cGMP actually means. Why should people even care? And how does this all play into how the public sees all these new treatments?
It's funny. Most people just don't realize how much cGMP is already a part of their daily lives. It's not just some, obscure set of regulations. It's really about making sure the things we use, the things we consume, especially medicines, are safe and they actually work.
Yeah.
And that they do that consistently.
Right. So back to the basics. What are these cGMPs? Why should we care?
Okay, so imagine you're baking cake, right? You follow a recipe. You follow it really precisely to make sure the cake turns out perfect every time. cGMP is kind of like that recipe. But for pharmaceuticals, it's all these rules, these guidelines that manufacturers have to follow so they can actually guarantee the quality of what they're making. And this means everything, from the raw ingredients to the final product. Everything's really carefully controlled every step of the way. And of course, it's documented.
Okay, so if I see a product that says it's made according to cGMP, does that basically mean I can trust that it's safe and it'll do what it says it does?
Exactly. And that's super important, especially when you're talking about cannabinoids and psychedelics, which, let's be honest, they haven't always had the best reputation. There's always been that stigma because people associate them with, recreational use. cGMP can help kind of bridge that gap by showing people that these products, when they're produced responsibly, they can be just as safe and reliable as any other medication.
I see. It's all about building trust, especially for things that people might already be kind of hesitant about.
Precisely. And this trust is built on some really key GMP principles. One of the most important ones is documentation and traceability. Literally every step of making these products, from where the raw materials came from to how they're packaged, it's all written down, documented very carefully.
So it's like a trail you can follow, right?
Oh, yeah.
Back to the very beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's super important for identifying and resolving any problems. Like, if there is a problem with a batch, manufacturers can look back and be like, okay, where did it come from? What happened? And then they can fix it. It's like a detective's case file, but for every single batch of product.
That makes sense. So that's documentation. What about, I think you mentioned something earlier, facility and equipment standards?
Absolutely. cGMP requires that companies making these things, they have to maintain a clean and controlled environment, so no contamination. Think like air filtration systems, temperature controls, humidity controls. They even have to use special equipment that's, inspected regularly and calibrated. It's like walking into a super high-tech lab. Everything is designed to minimize the risk of, messing things up or impurities getting in.
Wow. It sounds very intense, but I mean,
yeah.
Why go through all this trouble? What's the worst that could happen if companies just, didn't do this stuff?
Okay, so to really understand why cGMP is so important, we have to look back in time a bit. Before all these regulations were around, there were some pretty serious health crises because of products that were, inconsistent or just plain dangerous. Do you remember the thalidomide tragedy?
Yeah, that was awful. Wasn't that the drug they gave to pregnant women for morning sickness? And it ended up causing birth defects.
Exactly. And that happened because the manufacturing practices were just not good enough. They weren't consistent in how they were making the drug. And it led to, tragic consequences for so many families. And then there's the whole era of the snake oil salesmen. They were selling all these unregulated remedies, making all kinds of claims. And a lot of them were just harmful.
Yeah, it sounds like it was kind of like the Wild West back then for medicines.
It really was. And those failures, they made it really clear that we needed some kind of standardized regulations to protect public health. That's where GMP came from. And it's been evolving over time until we have the really robust system we have today.
So cGMP is basically learning from the mistakes of the past.
Yeah.
Making sure we don't repeat them.
Exactly. And these safeguards are especially important for these new therapies like cannabinoids and psychedelics. They have so much potential to be beneficial. But there's still that history and the stigma. So they really have to work harder to earn the public's trust.
Right. It's like they have to go above and beyond to prove themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And cGMP provides that framework. It shows that these companies are serious about quality and safety. And in the end, it shows that they're serious about the well-being of the people using their products.
Okay. So we've talked about documentation, we've talked about facilities, the historical context. What about the people actually making this stuff?
Right. That's another crucial part of cGMP, the personnel training and hygiene. Everyone working in a facility that's following cGMP guidelines, they go through serious training on procedures, sanitation, contamination control. It's like an army of highly skilled professionals, all working together to make sure every single product is top-notch.
So cGMP really covers everything, the environment, the equipment, the people.
It's all connected. Every detail matters when you're producing medicines that people are going to rely on. And that's where you see a big difference between products that follow cGMP and products that come from, unregulated markets. We should probably dive into that a bit more.
Yeah, good point. Let's talk about those differences. What are the risks of unregulated products?
Well, think about it like this. With an unregulated product, you're basically taking a gamble with your health. You really don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, that's not a great feeling.
Definitely not. Imagine you buy a product, let's say a cannabinoid product, and it claims to have a certain potency, right? But in reality, it's way lower. Or even worse, it's way higher. That means you might not get the treatment you need. Or you might end up having some really bad side effects.
It's like playing roulette with your well-being.
That's a perfect way to put it. And then there's the whole issue of contaminants without those strict cGMP controls. Unregulated products could have bacteria, heavy metals, pesticides, all kinds of impurities that you don't want anywhere near your body.
It's like comparing, eating from a street vendor with questionable hygiene to eating a meal prepared in a Michelin-starred restaurant.
That's a great analogy. With cGMP, you're getting that Michelin star level of assurance.
So cGMP is like the gold standard when it comes to making sure products are safe and high quality. But what about the bigger picture? Are there international standards too?
Oh, yeah. That's an important question. And the answer is yes. There's something called the International Council for Harmonization. They go by ICH. They develop guidelines for drug development and manufacturing that are accepted pretty much globally. And these guidelines help make sure there's a consistent level of quality and safety for medicines all over the world, including those made from cannabinoids and psychedelics.
So it's like the United Nations for pharmaceutical regulations, making sure everyone's on the same page.
You could say that having those universal standards is super important, especially when you're talking about people's health. You don't want to be in a situation where something is considered safe in one country, but then it's potentially dangerous somewhere else.
Makes sense. You mentioned something about impurities earlier, mutagenic impurities, right?
Right. Those are a big concern. Even tiny amounts of certain impurities can actually mess with your DNA, and that can potentially lead to cancer.
Oh, wow. That's scary. So how does cGMP help prevent that? How do we make sure those impurities don't end up in our medications?
So the ICH, they have this guideline. It's called M7. And it specifically deals with mutagenic impurities. It tells manufacturers how to identify them, how to measure them, how to control them throughout the entire manufacturing process.
It sounds incredibly complex.
It is. But that level of detail and rigor is what gives us confidence that the medicines we're taking are safe. It really shows how seriously they take their role in protecting public health.
It's like having a multi-layered safety net.
Exactly. To give you a real-world example, something that really shows how important it is to be vigilant, let's talk about the nitrosamine contamination incident.
Nitrosamines, those are the things found in processed meats, right? I think I remember hearing they can cause cancer.
Right. But what was really alarming was that they found nitrosamines in some medications too, even some that had been on the market for years. This discovery led to a ton of product recalls. And it really highlighted that we can't just set these standards and forget about them. We have to constantly monitor and improve the manufacturing processes.
So even with cGMP, there's always room for improvement.
Absolutely. The nitrosamine thing was a wake-up call. It showed that we can never get complacent about drug safety. It's an ongoing process, evaluating, refining, staying one step ahead of any potential risks.
Goes back to what you were saying before, learning from our mistakes.
Exactly. And as we move into this whole new world of cannabinoid and psychedelic therapies, this commitment to being vigilant and constantly improving, it becomes even more important. These are new frontiers in medicine, and we have to make absolutely sure they're developed responsibly, and with safety being the top priority.
I think that's a really good point. So we've established that cGMP is really important for making sure pharmaceuticals are safe and high quality. But from a consumer perspective, how can I actually tell if a product meets these standards?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's not always easy to tell just from the label. You have to remember that the FDA, they don't currently approve finished cannabinoid or psychedelic products for marketing, except for one prescription drug. It's called Epidiolex. It has CBD in it, and it's approved for certain types of seizures. But other than that, it's kind of a tricky landscape.
Yeah. Sounds like it can be a bit confusing for the average person.
It can be, but there are definitely things you can do to make sure you're making informed choices. First of all, be wary of products that are making, like, crazy claims or promising miracle cures. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Right. Don't fall for the hype.
Exactly. Another thing to look for is third-party lab testing. Some companies will have their products tested by independent labs, and those labs can check the cannabinoid or psychedelic content, and they can check for contaminants. So it's like an extra layer of assurance.
Like getting a second opinion.
Precisely. And some companies will even go a step further and get certifications that show they're following cGMP standards. That's a really good sign that they care about quality and transparency.
So it sounds like you really have to do your research. Be a savvy consumer.
Yeah, but it's worth it. When it comes to your health, knowledge is power. Do your research, ask questions. Don't be afraid to demand transparency from companies.
That's great advice. And it really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. cGMP is more than just a bunch of rules. It's about building trust, making sure things are safe. And ultimately, it's about paving the way for these new therapies so they can reach their full potential.
Well said. It's like a bridge between scientific discovery and responsible development. It creates a path where these treatments that could really change people's lives, are accessible and safe for everyone who needs them.
And on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. The history of cGMP, the principles behind it, how it impacts how people see these new therapies. Has been a really interesting conversation.
It has. Hopefully our listeners have a better understanding now of just how important cGMP really is in all our lives.
I know I do. And I hope this conversation has given our listeners the information they need to be more informed consumers and to advocate for quality and safety in everything they use.
That's what it's all about, empowering people with knowledge so they can make the best decisions for their health.
As always, we like to leave our listeners with something to think about, something to spark their curiosity and encourage them to keep learning.
You know, one thing that really struck me while we were preparing for this was this concept of potential impurities.
Potential impurities. What does that even mean?
So these are impurities that might not actually be present in the final product, but they could theoretically form during manufacturing or even while the product is being stored. It's a way of anticipating risks, even before they become a problem.
So it's like preventative detective work.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting is it takes a really deep understanding of chemistry and some really advanced analytical techniques to even be able to assess if these impurities might form.
Sounds complicated.
It is, and it shows that cGMP isn't just about following the rules. It's about using scientific knowledge and innovation to constantly improve quality and safety.
It's about always staying ahead of the game.
Right. And as we explore these new cannabinoid and psychedelic therapies, this proactive approach to risk management, it's going to be essential for building trust and making sure these treatments are successful in the long run.
So it's about protecting public health, but also allowing for innovation at the same time.
You got it. cGMP is the bridge between those two things.
I think that's a really great point to end on. cGMP is obviously going to continue to be a really important topic, especially as we move forward with all these advancements in medicine.
Definitely. I encourage everyone listening, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those conversations going.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.
It's all interconnected. Every detail matters when you're producing safe and effective medicines. And that's where the stark contrast between GMP-compliant products and those from unregulated markets becomes even more apparent.
That's a great point to pause on. We'll dig into those differences in just a sec.
Think about it this way. With unregulated products, you're essentially taking a gamble with your health. There's no guarantee of what you're actually getting.
That's a little unsettling, to say the least.
It really is. Imagine purchasing a cannabinoid product that claims to have a certain potency, but in reality, it's significantly lower or even higher that could lead to ineffective treatment or even adverse effects.
Yeah, it's like playing roulette with your well-being.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of contaminants without strict cGMP controls. Unregulated products could contain harmful bacteria, heavy metals, pesticides, or other impurities that you definitely don't want in your system.
It's almost like comparing a meal prepared in a street vendor's stall with questionable hygiene to a dish meticulously crafted in a Michelin-starred restaurant.
That's a great analogy. With cGMP, you're getting that Michelin star level of assurance when it comes to pharmaceutical production.
So cGMP is really the gold standard for ensuring quality and safety. But how does this all play into the global landscape? Are there international standards that govern these practices?
That's a crucial question, and the answer is yes. The International Council for Harmonization, or ICH, develops globally accepted guidelines for drug development, and manufacturing these guidelines help ensure a consistent level of quality and safety for medicines around the world, including those derived from cannabinoids and psychedelics.
So it's like a United Nations for pharmaceutical regulations, ensuring everyone is on the same page.
You could say that having universal standards is essential, especially when it comes to people's health. You don't want a situation where a product is considered safe in one country, but potentially harmful in another.
That makes a lot of sense. And one of the key areas these guidelines focus on is controlling impurities, right? I remember you mentioned something called mutagenic impurities earlier.
Yes, those are particularly concerning. Even trace amounts of certain impurities can interact with our DNA and potentially lead to cancer.
That's a scary thought.
Mm.
So how does cGMP help in preventing these impurities from ending up in our medications?
ICH Guideline M7 specifically addresses the assessment and control of mutagenic impurities in pharmaceuticals. It outlines strict protocols for identifying, measuring, and controlling these substances throughout the entire manufacturing process.
It sounds incredibly complex and rigorous.
It is. But it's that level of rigor that gives us confidence in the safety of the medicines we use, and it's a testament to how seriously cGMP takes its role in protecting public health.
It's like having a multi-layered safety net in place, catching potential problems at every stage.
Exactly. And to really illustrate the importance of this ongoing vigilance, let's look at a recent case that sent shockwaves through the pharmaceutical industry, the nitrosamine contamination incident.
Nitrosamines. Aren't those the compounds found in processed meats that have been linked to cancer?
That's right. But what's alarming is that nitrosamines were also found in certain medications, even those that had been on the market for years. This discovery led to widespread product recalls and highlighted the need for continuous monitoring and improvement of manufacturing processes.
So even with cGMP in place, there's always room for improvement and adaptation.
Absolutely. The nitrosamine incident served as a stark reminder that we can never become complacent when it comes to drug safety. It's a constant process of evaluating, refining, and staying ahead of potential risks.
It's like you said earlier, it's about learning from past mistakes and continuously striving to do better.
Precisely. And as we move into the era of cannabinoid and psychedelic therapies, this commitment to constant vigilance and improvement becomes even more crucial. These are new frontiers in medicine, and we need to ensure that they are developed responsibly and with the utmost attention to safety.
That's a really important point. So we've established that cGMP plays a vital role in ensuring the quality and safety of pharmaceuticals. But from a consumer's perspective, how can we actually tell if a product meets these standards?
That's a great question, and it's not always easy to determine just by looking at a label. Remember, the FDA doesn't currently approve finished cannabinoid or psychedelic products for marketing. There is one exception, a prescription drug called Epidiolex, which contains CBD and is approved for certain types of seizures.
Okay, so navigating this landscape can be a bit tricky for the average consumer.
It can be, but there are steps you can take to make informed choices. First and foremost, be wary of products that make grandiose claims or promise miracle cures. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Don't fall for the hype that's good advice for anything, really.
Absolutely. Secondly, look for products that have been tested by independent third-party labs. These labs can verify the cannabinoid or psychedelic content and check for contaminants, providing an extra layer of assurance.
So it's like getting a second opinion from a trusted source.
Precisely. And some reputable manufacturers will even go through the process of obtaining certifications that verify their compliance with cGMP standards. These certifications are a good indicator that the company is committed to quality and transparency.
So keep an eye out for those certifications. It sounds like being a savvy consumer in this space requires a bit of detective work.
It does, but it's well worth the effort when it comes to your health. Knowledge is power. Do your research, ask questions, and don't hesitate to demand transparency from manufacturers.
That's excellent advice. And it brings us to the heart of what we're talking about today. cGMP is more than just a set of regulations. It's a framework for building trust, ensuring safety, and ultimately paving the way for these new therapies to reach their full potential.
Well said. cGMP is the bridge that connects scientific discovery with responsible development, creating a path for a future where these potentially life-changing treatments are accessible and safe for everyone who needs them.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to think that even with all these safeguards in place, We still have to be thinking about the unknowns.
Right, that's what makes cGMP such a dynamic field. It's not just about reacting to problems that pop up. It's about looking ahead and trying to figure out what those problems might be before they even happen.
So it's like we're shaping the future of how drugs are developed, making sure these new therapies are starting off on the right foot.
Exactly. And this whole idea of thinking ahead, it's super relevant now, especially with personalized medicine becoming a bigger and bigger thing. Imagine a future where treatments are tailor-made for you based on your genes and your specific needs.
That sounds pretty incredible. But how does cGMP play into that?
Well, personalized medicine, it adds another layer of complexity, right? And that means we need even stricter quality control. Think about it. You're making a medication for one specific person. The margin for error is basically zero.
It's like cGMP, but on a whole other level.
Exactly. And that's why we need to keep researching and innovating when it comes to cGMP. We have to keep pushing those standards forward to keep up with all these changes that are happening.
It's like we're on the edge of a whole new era in healthcare, and cGMP is the map that's guiding us to a future where these amazing therapies are actually possible.
Absolutely. It's a future worth working towards. A future where these treatments are not just safe and effective, but they're available to everyone who needs them.
That brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of cGMP. And wow, what a journey. It's been fascinating to explore the history, the ideas behind it, and just how much of an impact these regulations actually have.
I hope our listeners have a better understanding now of how crucial cGMP is for all of us.
We really covered a lot today. From where GMP came from to how it's shaping these new treatments like cannabinoids and psychedelics. We even got a glimpse into the future of personalized medicine.
And it's clear that cGMP is going to be a major player as we move forward.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that cGMP is so much more than just a set of rules. It's about striving for excellence, putting safety first, and using our knowledge to protect and improve people's health.
Well said. It's the foundation we need to have trust in the medicines that heal and improve our lives.
And as we keep exploring what's possible in medicine, cGMP will be right there with us, guiding us towards a future where everyone has access to health and well-being.
That's a really great thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
And to everyone listening, remember to stay curious, stay informed, and never stop asking questions. That's how we build a healthier and brighter future. Until next time, keep exploring.